So there has been a upset between the classical liberals and the woke right, quote unquote, that we have seen play out mostly on Twitter, obviously. But that's where all the interesting discourse is actually happening. And it's been going on throughout 2024, and it kind of came to a head recently. I thought it was just worth actually talking it out a bit and trying to examine some of the underpinnings of the discussion, because I think there is actually something quite substantive here. So, I mean, we can begin in February 2024 when Konstantin Kisin wrote a Substack article just called Tucker Carlson and the Woke Right, where he's describing what he thinks the woke right is in contrast to the classical liberals, and how Tucker Carlson fulfills that. I personally didn't respond to any of this because I was just like, I don't know if I'm woke right. I don't think I'm woke right. And this kind of bubbled on the back burner. Andrew Doyle wrote something similar in November. And James Lindsay decided to push this to the fore by essentially tricking a Christian nationalist publication that I'd never heard of by rewriting large sections of the Communist Manifesto and rewriting them in great detail as well. So you would have to, I mean, to be fair, it should never have got past their sort of smell test, because there are some obvious allusions to the Communist Manifesto in it, and they should have known they were being essentially ragged on. But they didn't. But the point being, the bits that he had interpreted weren't promoting communism, they were promoting Christian nationalism, and that's why they published it. And James, when challenged on this, had to default back to, well, it's the same logical structure. It's like, well, the logical structure is there is something we don't like and we should change it. Therefore, yeah, you could apply that to literally anything. I mean, liberals would be fine with that. And so this kicked up a huge amount of stink. And back in October, Connor had written an article saying, well, look, there is no woke right. And what this really is, and I think he's right on this, is cracks showing in the woke coalition. Charges of wokeness are being levelled at various figures by politically homeless liberals. The problem with the term woke right is it's ill-defined, self-contradictory, and a tactical blunder for an anti-woke coalition to use. And so I think this is something worth talking about, because there is essentially the argument being made from the liberal side of this that, okay, the problem with the woke left is that it's woke and not that it's left. Right? That's, I think, really the issue, because what they would summarize woke as being a systematic critique of power relations in society and drawing attention to oppressions and injustice. Now, the average liberal should have no real problem with that concept, because that is, of course, what liberalism itself was founded on. As the purpose of liberalism was to critique the aristocratic regimes under which they lived, point out that they had no moral justification according to a different moral analysis, and, well, frankly, bring about revolutions, which is what the American and French revolutions were about, and instantiate a new liberal order. And so to say, well, we can't have a systematic critique of power and injustices is kind of off the table for the liberal. The liberal has to admit that they're fine with that, because that is, of course, the very nature of liberalism. Disagree at all yet?
I disagree, yeah.
Or what do you
respectfully.
On that critique, what do you disagree with?
Okay, so I think I heard that someone said that the problem with a woke left is that it's woke, not that it's left. I think that this isn't accurate. The criticism is, and when I say the criticism, right now I'm essentially arguing for my own view, because it's not that someone instantly has to say, you're with this person or with the other person. Right now, let me just rephrase the whole thing.
Well, hang on, before we go on, but did you object to my my characterization of liberalism?
Yes.
Why?
Because liberalism has a political dimension, which manifests historically in constitutional monarchy and republicanism, classical republicanism, mainly these two areas, and they do have they do tend to come with a realistic critique of how power works.
Sure.
A lot of people are criticized when they talk about liberalism. They're either criticizing deranged leftism or a caricature of libertarianism, which is, okay, just the state should have nothing to do with it. Essentially something close to ANCAP.
Sure, but if being woke is defined as applying a structural critique of power relations,
that, from my
to
understanding,
identify injustices.
from my understanding of this conversation, it isn't just the applying the systematic critique, because, for instance, realism, which we could say lots of the U.S. founding fathers, and also Burke in his critique of the French Revolution, they were using.
Yeah.
The issue isn't that there is a systematic critique of social phenomena. The issue is that there are some overlaps, and that this systematic critique takes some particular forms. And what Lindsay and Kissin are saying, and lots of people, is that, for instance, the same way lots of people on the left are saying, well, it's the white straight male who's responsible for everything. They say, for instance, that lots of people are saying this for the Jewish people.
Sure.
Or lots of people are saying this for the classical liberals. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that there are lots of, attitudinal overlaps between the way these two camps think, and they have lots more in common than they would like to think.
Sure, but drilling down into it is the point I'm trying to make, is the idea of just labeling a systematic critique as a woke position, which a lot of people are doing, and we'll get to in a minute how other people are doing. Well, if that's woke, then liberalism itself was always woke.
Then everything is woke, yeah.
Well,
almost everything except
not necessarily everything, but everything in modern politics, then, by that standard, right? There are definitely political views that aren't systematic critiques of things, but liberalism began as a systematic critique of the way that society and the justified forms of power structures.
It was essentially saying that human beings occupy the same position in the great chain of being, and the feudal system was based on the idea that some people are naturally superior.
Yeah, and so it is in and of itself, it has to be that. So if the classical liberals say, well, it's being woke is the problem, then, well, are you really a classical liberal then? Because classical liberalism has that baked into it. But the point being, I think, is the issue that actually it's the systematic critique from the left rather than one from a centrist or right-wing perspective.
I think it's when it takes particular forms. It's not
that's what I'm saying.
The problem isn't that there is a systematic critique. The problem is when we have very low resolution analyses. So, for instance,
I don't even think it's that. I think the problem is the impulse that underpins the nature of the critique. Why are you leveling a critique that renders straight white men as the enemy of civilization? When, like I say, they're responsible for everything. They're kind of the authors of civilization, actually. So why is the critique being leveled from that perspective? The idea of the critique itself is fine, and so that's not the issue with being woke. The issue with being woke is attacking the majority population of the country.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So that's the point I was trying to drill down to. Like the classical liberal has to concede that there is, of course, a critique of power and structure contained within liberalism. So that's not what they're objecting to. And I've noticed that the point that they want, though, is to arrive at, oh, well, I'm happy with like the 90s liberal establishment consensus. And so if you are to, say, go any further than that and engage with critiques made from the left by what I think are quite brilliant left-wing thinkers, whether you like them or not, you have to concede their skills, then suddenly they view this as, oh, well, that's communism. It's like, okay, well, look, the reason you're afraid of this is because you don't properly understand it, and you feel like you have no defense against it, right? I personally am never going to become a Frankfurt School communist because I'm not any kind of communist. I'm for hierarchy. I'm not against it. I'm not trying to achieve their goal. But after reading various members of the Frankfurt School, for me it's Marcuse, Horkheimer and Adorno, I can't deny that these are brilliant thinkers and that they have incisive critiques of the world. Whether you like them or not, and I know you don't like them, they are impressive thinkers.
Well, there's a reason that the left have captured these institutions, right?
Exactly. There's a reason that we live in the shadow of these people, and that everyone's running around screaming like they're Satan. And so, I mean, like in this Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man, right? It is a good critique of what liberal democracies end up unconsciously doing to themselves. Go and watch my book club on the website, and in fact, gift a subscription to someone else so they can watch it too, right? Because I spent literally like a month studying this book, trying to properly understand it. And he is right that there is a kind of totalizing perspective within Enlightenment and liberal democracy, as in it feels that it has to, and it not even feels, it has to, it can't help but disenchant the world and make no space for the legitimacy of non-rational thinking, right? There's just no question of that.
So, first of all, I'm a rationalist. So when you're talking about the legitimacy of non-rational thinking, count me in.
Yeah, well, I'm totally against you.
Yeah, same.
We will fight.
Right.
Go on.
Yes. So when it comes to what you're talking about, the disenchantment of the world, I would say that a lot of people who are critiquing, who are suddenly discovering the internet, and they can talk about everything instantly. The disenchantment of the world has lots of reasons, lots of causes behind it. Most of it are technological. They have to do with metaphysical positions.
Yes.
For instance, like materialism. I'm not a materialist, but materialism is it's a completely orthogonal view on this.
I don't know if it is, and I don't want to get into the long debate of it now. Yeah. The point being, it is a worthwhile debate to be had.
Yes, definitely.
And Marcuse was making an incisive critique of what was happening.
But just one sentence. What I find insufferable about critical theorists, what I find insufferable is they're constantly talking about problems without offering solutions. So constantly they say, okay, instrumental reason is destroying all the world and all these, bad people. Yeah. Do you have the guts to actually go back to traditionalism in metaphysics, traditionalism in philosophy, and do it? They didn't.
I know.
They didn't.
I know. But I know.
They constantly spoke about the problem, lamenting.
I know.
But they didn't have the guts to go back to antiquity.
I know. And I don't want to get into it, but they don't. They're essentially just, it's a one long big lament that communism is never really going to come about, right? That's all of this is. And like you said, they don't have the guts to actually accept that a slightly, I guess we'll just call it traditional frame actually has legitimacy, blah, blah, blah. And it's actually funny in this where Marcuse goes, well, the problem with instrumentalizing high culture is that you destroy it, and a true high culture requires an aristocratic class that can separate it from the everyday material world. And it's
like that you're looking at me, yes.
Well, the thing is, and he reluctantly admits that has to be the case, or else you get, you listen to Bach or Mozart in the elevator with elevator music. So there's no transcendental experience when you're enjoying it. There's nothing new. There's nothing that takes you out of the world, and it becomes just melded into the one-dimensional. You're sat in your fluorescent lit office listening to something that does nothing to you and brings you no new experiences, and it's just like everything gets mushed down into the same layer. It's a great critique. It's very incisive.
I would argue that a lot of these things, a lot of the magic of the modern world is the proletarianization of the world, in that everything is very accessible to the lowest common denominator, and I think that's terrible. I don't want it to be.
That's exactly his critique. He's like, look, these things can only essentially be magical when they're not freely available to everyone.
Yep.
When they're not just played in the elevator, it has to be something special and held back. And so that, am I woke right for thinking that? I have no idea.
No, you're not.
No, I don't think I am either. But
also, you're not according to most of the definitions you're putting forward.
Well, let's get to definitions of woke right, because I think the issue here is that the classical liberals are just essentially afraid of the intellectual development that the philosophical culture has made throughout the 20th century. They don't want to engage with it. They don't want to accept it, and they want to kind of just default back to something that John Stuart Mill would have been happy with.
Okay, I think that what is going on here is that a lot of people in, let's say, on the right, or in lots of classical liberals, let's say, they are worried that a lot of people, especially on social media, are adopting the no enemies to the right tactic, and they are pandering to audiences of people without drawing red lines.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
what happens is that they are trying to propose where to draw the red line. Do I agree with? I agree that a red line has to be drawn, but obviously there is a question to be had as to where it has to be drawn.
Sure. And
so that's what I think is happening here.
Sure, and we've got a line drawn here by James Lindsay. The woke right are modern day fascists in exactly the same way the woke left are modern day communists. Well, there's an interesting admission that like fascism's left wing. But so go on.
Woke left and modern day communists. There's overlap there, sure, but
they are definitely communists. But like it's like saying, you know, my childhood self is me, and I'm the modern day version of my childhood self. It's like, well, yeah.
I feel like it's unsatisfactory.
Yeah, it's a terrible definition.
Yeah, because communist conjures up the notion of a conventional communist like Lenin, Mao, Karl Marx, and it's ideologically distinct, even though there is crossover.
I don't know if I'd say it was ideologically distinct. The woke left are descendants of those people, because people like Lenin were like, okay, why hasn't the communist revolution come about? And a lot of people, and then he of course is instrumental in the Russian Revolution. But then you have people like Gramsci who are like, okay, well, why didn't it come about in the West? And then you've got a very long and autistic history of people looking at the concept of ideology and saying, right, it's the things that the West believes and instantiates into itself that prevents communism coming about. And therefore, you've got Kimberly Crenshaw, who directly picks up Gramsci's argument that we would need a war of position rather than a war of maneuver against the establishment and governments of the West in order to dissolve the cultural fabric of our societies, which is exactly the point of intersectionality. And so it's not that they're not communists. What they are communists who are like, oh, we failed there, we failed there, we failed there. We need a tactic in order to win. So they are communists. They're doing exactly what the communists have always done. If Marx had lived in this day and age rather than back in the 19th century, he would have done this exactly the same thing, because he would have been given access to the intellectual equipment and tools that our modern communists have. So, you know, it is true they are modern day communists, but it's not really describing what has happened.
I mean, to sort of give the devil its due here, I think the closest thing that the woke is to communist is, as you said, the use of intersectionalism to create these divisions and basically divide and conquer, isn't it? Except rather than it being on a class basis, it's on lots of different demographic details, and therefore it's more effective.
No, because what the communists want is the dissolution of society, right? Because it is in society itself that inequality and hierarchy are formed.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, but that's intersectionality is just a tool to continue on down that path.
Mm-hmm. The idea behind this demarcation isn't that they are exactly the same. It's that they have sufficient commonalities that are corrosive of society.
Yeah, I think what we can agree on is we don't like them and we want to crush them politically, no matter whether they're woke or communists.
But the point being, like, say, oh, these are just modern day fascists. It's like, okay, but the fascists are not what the dissident right are, because fascism, again, it's itself like a rationalistic philosophy, whereas the dissident right are more in the sort of Burkean tradition, sort of postmodern Burkeanism, frankly, where it's not that they have like a single structured plan for the entire world. And then you get the Christian nationalists. I don't think it's fair to call them fascist. I think I'm not saying they're not going to be authoritarian, but they're going to be theocratic, which obviously fascism wasn't. So,
but the question here is whether you think that this is desirable or not, because, for instance, as you said, fascism as a rationalistic view. I think fascism was precisely anti-rationalistic. Well, that's why they prioritized irrational stuff like blood.
No. Fascism didn't prioritize blood. It prioritized statehood. It was Nazism prioritized blood. But anyway, it's like I'm actually kind of tired of people saying, "Oh, fascism was just irrationalistic." It's like, well, yeah, but it wasn't though.
So,
on some level, yes, but on other levels, no.
Okay, so
it accepted the liberal construction of the state.
Okay,
and so Sorry, go on.
No, I would say that temperamentally.
Sure.
There are some people who say, okay, I'm bored of constantly listening to the problems of fascism and also the mustache guy.
Yeah, me too.
Right. I think we should constantly listen to this, but also we should constantly listen to Stalin. So for me, it's important. One of the things that lead to totalitarianism is slow habituation into viewing violence as something that is more acceptable than it should be in society.
Sure.
So when particular views are constantly desensitizing people with respect to this, then you have lots of people who forget. So my point is, yeah, it may be boring, but I think people should constantly be reminded this from both sides, not just one.
Sure.
And say, well, I don't like hearing constantly about one of the guy, or I don't like constantly hearing about the other.
Okay, well, moving on. Konstantin decided he was going to withdraw the term woke right, which is fine. Again, I never felt attacked by it. I don't know what it's supposed to characterize. If you mean Christian nationalist, just say Christian nationalist. I just don't see the point of creating an otherizing term, which, as you pointed out when we were talking about this before, that's what this is. It's a way of just saying enemies compared to friends, which is pure Schmittianism, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with you doing that. But
you have to draw the line, and remember that a lot of the criticisms of classical liberals is that they haven't been drawn lines.
Sure, that's definitely a left-wing criticism of classical liberals. But the point being, he says, okay, well, look, provide me a better term. And this is essentially the definition that he's trying to get to, right? And I think this is perfectly fine for us to discuss. So it's thinking the West is bad and siding with its enemies. Right. So I don't think there are any groups on the right that think the West is bad. I think what there are groups on the right that, at worst, think that the regime that controls the West is bad, as in they're against liberalism and internationalism, and therefore they like people like Assad and Putin, because they see in Assad and Putin a kind of totemic force against global homogenization of the entire world. And so it's not that these people are necessarily desperate for the Russians to take over the West and replace the Western population with Russians or something like that. What they see is just anti-liberalism.
Well, I would say one of the very few things uniting all of the right is a certain sense of Western chauvinism, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the West is the best, and it is, undeniably.
Yeah, an absolute sort of aggressive parochialism.
My issue with this is that there are many conceptions of the West. So some people view West entirely as biological, and others view it culturally. Others view it as Christianity.
Sure.
Others view it as a strand of Christianity. It's a very vague statement.
I think
vague statements do lead to confusion.
Sure. I think Konstantin would argue, though, that it essentially means the Anglosphere and Europe.
Yeah, but what about them? Because if you constantly
they
change the mix of the population, let's say in those areas, you basically destroy the West. You don't.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I know. But the point is, someone in woke right would have to think the West is bad and siding with its enemies. So again, I don't think that people are against the West, as we've defined it there. What it is, they're against the regimes that control the West, such as the European Union, the Democrat Party, the international deep state, whatever it is, right? So there's that. I think essentially makes these criteria essentially don't refer to anyone. That's the problem. So the next one is playing identity politics on the basis that their group is oppressed by a secret invisible force controlled by another group/groups. It's like, okay, well, I mean, to say that identity is and concerns of identity make you woke right, because what this is a very, very specific and narrow definition that would carve out a very small constituency of hysterical people on Twitter. But to suggest that, say, identity politics that represent a group as being oppressed by not even a secret force, just any invisible force that's controlled by the groups, well, that's obviously true, right? So the example being left-wing activists who staff our institutions. Again, they're not secret or invisible, but they are actively discriminating against straight white men. Which, take the example for the Air Force recently. They're like, oh, we're just getting useless straight white men applying as pilots, and we're not going to get them. It's like, okay, so there is definitely a group of people who have a particular ideological agenda who are discriminating and oppressing, therefore, using state power and institutional power, the majority population. I mean, there was an example of the police force in like Cheshire, where this guy had wanted to become a cop his entire life. He was like the perfect candidate, and he got refused, and then sued them and proved that they had racially discriminated against him. So it has to be true that there are identity politics based on group oppression, or else why would we complain about woke?
There wouldn't be borders if that weren't the case.
Exactly. What would the problem with woke then, if that wasn't true? You know,
I have particular objections from this coming from Konstantin Kisin, because of course he was the person who was telling the victim of the grooming gangs not to talk about identity, and I think that really left a sour taste in my mouth. And to be honest, I think
that was an identitarian issue. There was a particular group oppressing someone else because they belonged to another group.
And I think that you can't close Pandora's box now if you want to raise the issue of ethnic identity. The way in which you avoid getting taken advantage of is to stand up for yourself. And I don't think that telling people that engaging in identitarianism is now bad, because if we don't do this, we will be taken for a ride, as we are. We'll have to pay benefits for foreigners and other people, because we can't distinguish the native British population, say, or the native whichever country it is, from the people who've come here, taking advantage of us, basically.
But also, it means that you can't apply a structural critique about the problems that the left has created. So if the left institutionalizes a load of minoritarian-based, anti-majoritarian, racial, ethnic, gender, sexuality policies, then, okay, but to be able to root them out, we have to be able to at least identify them and say, well, look, this group is oppressing this group for X, Y, Z reasons. So, like, that is us having to look at the identity politics and address it, even if you want to be a pure formal proceduralist about it. You have to accept that the structural critique is valid. Otherwise, what are we even doing? And otherwise, what you've done is allow the left to drag our institutions radically to the left, and then you go, right, okay, guys, this is where we're staying. We're staying neutral now. It's like, no, we don't want to be neutral now. That's not the future I want. You know, I don't want my children being institutionally discriminated against because of their race. And so we have to accept that there's a critique. Anyway, having an obsession with group-based victimhood and grievance, well, it depends on how much it's affecting your direct personal life. Like, why is it my children are trying, the teachers in my schools are trying to get my children to go to mosques and bow in prayer as a way of, like, you know, sharing their culture with us, but the Muslim children are never brought to a church and they engage in prayer in a church, right? That, like, this matters. This matters.
You're right on this, and I fully agree with you here. And here is where I think that they are going very astray with this, because philosophically speaking, identity politics, well, you can carve identity in all sorts of ways in the same way you can do that with West. There are all sorts of friends and enemies, and everyone is drawing the red line somewhere. Yeah. So depending on whether you draw the red line, you have at least two identities that matter.
I agree. I totally agree. But the point is,
and it's also very abstract, because, you know, we shouldn't just examine it in the abstract. It's just, we're talking about a society with particular problems that have arisen historically. So could it be that group-based victimhood has arisen for group-based reasons? If yes, then people should view it.
And also, the nature of victimhood doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a grooming gang, right? It can be something that's more subtle, that you don't want to call being a victim, but is in some way sort of a sandpaper effect to the culture.
You could say anything relating to a two-tier society.
Yeah, something like that. And this is a problem that we live in now. So again, like, to say, well, being concerned about that essentially puts you in the woke right is to say, no, I'm fully committed to the atomic liberal perspective on what a human being is, And actually, I don't think that's correct. And I can see in my real life, everyday life, how this is not going to solve the problems that are being imposed on us from the left. But there are...
That's wrong,
there are various other things, revising and perverting history to fit an ideological narrative. Well, I mean, history is a set of lies agreed upon, so that's is guilty of that, frankly. I agree with Napoleon on that one, to be honest. Reacting to disagreement with name-calling, ostracism, and bullying. Well, who has done that, James Lindsay? Who's been calling people woke right as an otherizing term? Like, sorry, when Tim Pool came out and was like, well, that makes James Lindsay and the classical liberals the woke right, the right hand of the left. Yeah, well, that's true by this own definition. Sorry, and then creating a culture of fear among more center-leaning people to prevent criticism. It's like, well, I don't think there should be a culture of fear, obviously.
What amazes me, though, is why people react so much against this. Why is it that people react as if they're like demons, and you throw garlic or holy water in them?
Well, this
because
is
I made a post, and a lot of the people that now are trashing Lindsay, they did the same to me and even worse.
Yeah, I know.
So
I think it's just the nature.
I'm just asking myself, why did they not ignore it?
Well, it's the same with like the James Lindsay fans calling me a communist, because I was like, no, I think that actually these people had good critiques of modern society and we should take them seriously because they're highlighting our weaknesses that we can solve. And they're like, oh, right, you're a full communist now. It's like, that's right, comrade. Collectivize the means of production. I'm only a business owner. Yeah, I want the state to take over my business. Fucking idiots.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
A confession. Now that's funny, but when you debated with you and Connor debated Phil Labonte and Tim Pool on liberalism, I posted and said, Phil, if you need help with these commies, call me.
I mean, just of all the things to call me, a communist is so funny. Anyway, we'll leave that there because I know I've been going on for quite some time. But basically, what are we even trying to do here, right? It's fine to have structural critiques. It's fine to have an identity, and it's fine to want to protect that identity. And that might not be most doctrinaire liberal position, but sorry, we live in the world in which we live. We don't live in homogenous 90s societies. Things have changed. We have to change with them. Subscription for someone that you know and love and you think they would enjoy our work, and go and watch Harry's latest breakdown on the career of Stanley Kubrick, who is, of course, a fascinating filmmaker and a person with a strange mystique surrounding him. And Harry does a really amazing job of laying out exactly how and why he gained this kind of reputation. And then go and follow us on X for all the latest updates of what we're doing.